about a technology project involving the archiving and dissemination of information, about neither of which I have any training at all. So there's a not insubstantial chance that everyone in this room is wasting their time, but I hope not. I hope that you'll come away from this with having learned a little something. I've captioned the talk Crowdsourcing and Open Access for the following reason. I should also preface this one more time. I'm about to stop giving disclaimers and actually start giving the content. But before I do, there's one more disclaimer. I designed these slides originally for a presentation that I delivered to the faculty at the University of Cincinnati, who are a well-intentioned, very bright bunch, but not technologically sophisticated. So I will, with a few exceptions, that's right, with a vanishingly few exceptions, all of whom are present in this room. So having said that, it's highly likely that I'll skip past a few things as we're proceeding. These slides are up on the wiki for the conference. You can download them yourself if you want. I also put up on the wiki site a couple of links if you want to provide feedback to me either on this presentation or on the project that I'm going to be talking about. But the topic that I want to introduce today is using the sort of peer production, the mass anonymous creation phenomenon that we've seen on the internet in lots and lots and lots of different instances to actually generate legal content and get it online. So I'll talk about why we might want to do that, what the current status is of various efforts to digitize legal texts and make them available. And I'll conclude with a demo of a project that I've been working on and off, more off than on, frankly, over the course of about the last 8 months. And then I'll be happy to take questions at the end. So again, when I present this talk to my colleagues at the law school, one thing I need to define for them up front is just what we're talking about when we refer to the open access movement. I am fairly sure that a lot of you, particularly those of you in the library and technology fields in this room, have a fairly good idea that there is, in fact, this movement going on. It's being driven partly by economics and partly by technological imperatives, and partly, as I'm going to argue in a minute, by sort of a sense of moral requirement. The economic part of this is simple. The internet, as we all know, is a very cheap, very effective platform for disseminating works of a particular kind, works that are represented in digital format. Because the internet makes publishing cheap, the argument goes, there's no reason why it shouldn't also make access equally cheap, equally free, equally available, without any particular form of constraints other than those that are inherent in getting access to the internet itself in the first place. That's a workable, perhaps not a complete, as I'll argue in just a minute, but a workable definition of what we're talking about when we refer to open access, why it's a beneficial thing. Open access is a little bit of a new entrant in the legal community. It's very, very, very well established in the scientific community, where they've been dealing for years now with escalating journal prices that run into the thousands of dollars. It makes any of the law reviews published at any of our schools look like real bargains by comparison. As journal prices have risen, the scientific community and now increasingly the legal community have begun to rebel. Partly this is just a result of economics, but also it's partly driven by kind of the moral imperative of advancing the frontiers of knowledge, making information and research more broadly available, and so forth. So there is this nascent phenomenon, this beginnings of a movement to increase the free availability of texts in the, and now with particular reference to legal texts. But the movement hasn't progressed equally first, we're nowhere near, I think, catching up with the scientific community. And secondly, the kinds of information that's freely available online in the legal world varies a lot. It varies widely based on what sort of information we're talking about. I've listed on the slide here examples of some kinds of content that have been given the open access treatment. At the time that I first delivered this talk to the faculty at my school, I didn't have anything terribly positive to say about any of these categories. So primary legal sources of information, cases, statutes, regulations, that kind of thing. The actual law, the actual rules that bind our conduct on the one hand. Secondary materials on the other hand, which is sort of explanatory materials about the law. Think legal treatises, think legislative histories, backgrounds on statutes, the administrative records that underlie the issuance of regulations, that kind of thing. And third, legal scholarship, which are just people writing about things 1 and 2. Right? At the time I first gave this talk, I was able to say, well, we don't have a lot of primary source materials online. That's no longer true, as I'll talk about in just a second. Both of the presentations that I've been to already today have mentioned public.resource.org and alt law, which I'll talk about in a second. But as it happens, now in 2008, just since the beginning of the year, we have some very new, very expansive, extensive online repositories of primary source materials. Skipping over the secondary ones for a second, going down to legal scholarship. This is an area where things are improving pretty rapidly too. There was a talk yesterday on BE Press. SSRN is another repository that lots of people are acquainted with. SSRN made the news lately when the Supreme Court cited an SSRN paper for the first time in a published opinion. Recently, the law faculty at Harvard followed the arts and sciences faculty at Harvard and adopted a resolution saying that henceforth all law faculty scholarship at Harvard is going to be placed in one of these online repositories. I think they're actually going to be creating their own. But at any rate, there are good things to be said on both on number 1 here and on number 3. Number 2, not so much. There's an awful lot of information that exists out there in the form of secondary materials, some of which are really quite important, as the specific example I'm going to talk about later on, that have never been freely available online for reasons that are not entirely clear to me, perhaps just the lack of commitment of resources, lack of interest, but that I think now are going to be moving online in greater numbers. Right? This is my one slide about law. I have to have case sites in here somewhere because I'm a professor. This is what I do for a living. The point that I wanted to make here is that it's particularly easy from a legal perspective to justify getting primary and a lot of secondary case and statutory materials online, because the big roadblock, intellectual property, copyright, ownership of the content, doesn't get in your way at all when we are talking about cases, when we're talking about statutes, when we're talking about actual laws that govern us and bind our conduct. As a matter of federal law, all works created by federal employees within their scope of employment are public domain. You can copy them, I can copy them, anybody can copy them. As a matter of case law, as a matter of judicial interpretation, the same is true of state laws, state statutes, state judicial opinions, and so forth. Interestingly, this case at the bottom, which I understand is actually pronounced VEC, came down a few years ago. And it actually said, even if something wasn't written by a governmental employee, even if it was authored by a private person, as soon as it's enacted as law, becomes law somewhere, copyright vanishes. Copyright is gone. So there's no intellectual property problem with putting online an awful lot of primary legal and, in some cases, secondary source materials. Now, I need to caveat this because of something that has been in the news lately that some of you might have heard about, which is the state of Oregon has not read my slide on intellectual property law. The state of Oregon has recently asserted a copyright over state statutes. The dispute is, I gather, in litigation now.
They settled yesterday.
Did they? What's the outcome?
They turned it over.
The state turned it over, they abandoned?
Just publishing.
Okay, well that's good news for open access then. So yeah, that's yet another example. I'm a little bit disappointed that they caved. I really would have liked to have the precedent on that. But it's good news for all. All right. So there was, until yesterday, an assertion of copyright in state law by the state of Oregon, but I guess that is now no longer. So that confirms what I say on my slide in that case, which is that there really isn't an intellectual property problem with getting lots of this stuff and putting it online. All right. Now here is another respect in which my slide has changed a lot just in the course of this year to date. When I gave this talk for the first time, I was able to show that to the faculty in my school that of the information, of the legal information that has been put on the internet and made available for free, the bulk of it is recent stuff. So the Supreme Court, for example, on its very own website, makes available for download huge PDF files of every volume of the United States reports that's been published since about the late 1990s, right? The earlier stuff, though, was available from about the 1890s to the present, and then along came publicresource.org and AltLaw, and they put on all the rest of it. So Supreme Court coverage, until recently sporadic, is now pretty complete. Thanks to public.resource.org and AltLaw, these are links in the slide. If you want to download the slides, you can check them out. Thanks to those people, we now can say pretty much the same thing about the decisions of the lower federal courts of appeals. Those are now mostly, with a few exceptions that you'll run across every now and then, available for free online at least somewhere. What's even better, this is one of the things I really like about the AltLaw site, is they have gone back in, one senses through an automated mechanism of some kind or other, and internally hyperlinked all of their decisions, right? So if a case cites an earlier case, you can click, you can go there. They're actually turning this stuff into content that's useful online. Below that level, this is all brand new. The complete availability of Supreme Court decisions and the near complete availability of Federal Court of Appeals decisions is something that has happened in the last 6 months. So that this is, Gene Koo, I think, said in the last talk that this is turning into a banner year for open access. I think he's right about that, just in terms of the volume of information. Once you leave that level, though, once you start talking about the lower federal courts, all the district courts, all of the specialized courts, courts of federal claims, courts of international trade, everything that's kind of got its own reporter in the West system, you find that relatively few of those are available online. There is, again, a very strong bias towards the most recent, the most contemporary sources. Same with the United States Code. The current version is actually available in multiple places now, but heaven help you if you're trying to do historical research, right? What did the United States Code look like in the 1940s, right? You're not going to be able to answer that question easily by consulting entirely free online sources, right? What has happened, too, is that even when older information, non-contemporary information is available online, what has happened more often than not is someone, very often the government, has just scanned it and posted a JPEG. Just posted, or if you're somewhat lucky, a PDF. But they've just posted an image, a picture of what the page looks like. And that causes problems if what you actually want is the text. If what you want is to cut and paste out of the document. You can't really do that if all they have posted is an image, a picture, right? Much the same is true with secondary sources, legislative histories, those handful of treatises that have fallen out of copyright and so forth. Right? So if what you want is last week's Supreme Court decision in the Boumediene case, you're going to be able to find it all over. Right? If what you want is something older, maybe a legislative history from a Congress, that's not the most recent one, it's really much harder to find stuff like that free online. This is an area where the proprietary database vendors really do have an awful lot of stuff that the rest of us just don't have, or at least can't have unless we subscribe. Right? I've talked, I want to kind of caveat this slide too before I go on. I'm sorry I keep doing that. I am a professor. We have this irrepressible urge to drop little footnotes when we write or when we speak. Getting information online in text form is part of the battle. It's not the whole battle. There is definitely a need for better indexing, better search capabilities, that kind of thing. One of the co-authors of my blog, a guy named Bill McGevern, who teaches at the University of Minnesota, sort of poo-poos the whole idea that we're really doing anybody any favors just by putting legal information online. He says what really counts is making it searchable, having good indexes, making it accessible, that kind of thing. My view on that is let's just get the information online first, and then the tools for the indexes and the search tools and everything will build themselves. They'll assemble around the availability of content to be searched, to be indexed. But I'm aware that from a perspective of actually making all this stuff useful, just having it online is not the end of the story. It is the only part of the story that I'm talking about today, however. The problem is these quaint little objects over here, right? Many of us are still familiar with them. We've seen them from time to time. Paper, as it turns out, is a dynamite way of transmitting information across great spans of time. Right? Turns out to be a less useful way of transmitting information globally and making it easily accessible. If information is in books, you need the book, right? Or you need somebody to have copied, digitized the book for you. Right? There are projects underway to convert lots and lots of those piles of paper into things that the rest of us can view, even if we don't actually have a physical copy. Everybody, I'm sure, has heard of the Google Books project, formerly known as Google Print. You can now go to books.google.com and search and see if a book that you want has been scanned. And if it has, you may be able to view all or part of it in image format on Google. Open Content Alliance is doing some very similar stuff. The Library of Congress, believe it or not, they haven't been trumpeting it because they're not sort of in the whole self-promotion game to quite the same degree as a company like Google is. But the Library of Congress has this thing called the American Memory Project that has digitized thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of early United States documents. It includes legal documents and includes lots of other stuff too. But they're just kind of digitizing it and dumping it all out onto the web, one JPEG at a time. Not the most useful organizational tool, I think, but again, if the information is out there, others can come along and organize it and figure out how to parse through it and that kind of thing. So at least they are taking the step of getting the images out there. Right? But images aren't the best. Images aren't what we want, right? Because you can't Google an image, at least not yet. Right? Some of these sites have also kind of got their own little proprietary readers. You can look at the page in your browser, but you may not be able to actually download and view offline. Right? The Library of Congress, as good as it has been at digitizing aspects of its collection, principally the older aspects, historical aspects, has estimated that if they were to launch a crash Apollo program style work to go through the entire collection of the Library of Congress, massively increase the current rate at which they are digitizing information and putting it online, They were pretty sure that they could get through the entire collection of the Library of Congress in only 1,800 years. Right? Even with a massive increase in investment in scanning power, it doesn't even do justice to describe it as the tip of the iceberg. It's the tip of the tip of the tip of the tip of an iceberg that is unimaginably voluminous below the level of the surface. So there's only so much that all of these institutional actors, as good as they are, can accomplish. Right? There is room here, I will suggest to you, for participation by others, participation by those outside the institution, participation by the broader community of which we are all a part. All right? And that brings me to crowdsourcing. I don't have to define that term, I am sure, for this audience. Right? Crowdsourcing, it's sort of a portmanteau word play on outsourcing, and it just means giving things over to a large group of anonymous people and letting them kind of just sort of turning them loose and seeing what they come up with. There have been example after example after example of how just giving people pieces of information and letting them build from it has produced things that are really quite remarkable, really pretty amazing. Yochai Benkler wrote an entire book chock full of examples that's really just kind of an argument about how this paradigm is going to displace production by firms. It's going to be a new way of creating content of all sorts, not just the kinds of things that it has been used for principally so far. So the phenomenon of just letting a large kind of anonymous distributed community self-organize over the internet and produce things has produced some things like the Linux operating system. It's produced things like the Firefox web browser, Second Life, Wikipedia, and it has produced a project that some of you may be familiar with, but I'm willing to bet most of you aren't. Who's heard of Wikipedia? Everybody, shortly. Right? Any hands not up when I ask who's heard of Wikipedia? All right. Wikipedia is actually one, and certainly the largest and certainly the best known, but only one, of a family of about a dozen projects that are all run by this outfit called the Wikimedia Foundation. Right? One of Wikimedia's sister projects is this thing called the Wiki Source. Who's heard of that? Right? Few hands, but less, far less, I dare say, than the unanimity of people who are experienced with Wikipedia. Right? Wiki Source is a free digital library. It's a digital library of free texts, which is to say texts that either are in the public domain because there is no copyright over them, or texts that have been freely released by their authors. So works that are perhaps published under a Creative Commons license. That would be an example of something that you would find on Wiki Source. Wikipedia in the academic community, I gather at least, is slightly controversial. It's actually the use of Wikipedia as a research reference is aggressively discouraged by the librarians at the University of Cincinnati. Not by the law librarians, I hasten to add. I don't think the law library has taken a view on that one way or the other. But it's really quite remarkable how the main campus librarians have been on almost like a crusade, a little bit of a tear against Wikipedia. Why? How come? What's the problem with Wikipedia? Yeah?
Well, you have a fundamental problem with accuracy.
There's a problem with accuracy, right? It's a wiki. Anybody can just come along and say anything, right? Of course, then maybe somebody else will come along and fix it, right? And correct it again. That's certainly an aspect of the problem. Yeah, the problem is that Wikipedia, I think, ultimately is controversial because they are striving for a thing that knowledge theorists have told us cannot exist, and that is neutrality. Right? Wikipedia's guiding mantra is the neutral point of view. We've got to have a neutral point of view in all of our articles, and edits should reflect that. Right? I think that's ultimately what makes Wikipedia controversial, because there are people who have argued fairly forcefully that there is no such thing. Right? Wiki Source, the free digital library, I think is less controversial precisely because it has a different mantra. It's going for something entirely different. Whereas Wikipedia aspires to the neutral point of view, Wiki Source aspires to faithful reproduction of a source text as published. Right? That, I think, is something that we can have a little bit more consensus on. Right? You can debate whether the Wikipedia article about Dick Cheney adheres to the neutral point of view or not until the cows come home. Right? But we can achieve, I think, a lot more consensus on, yes, this page of this document says X. Right? So fidelity to the original published source text is, I think, a little bit more workable as a goal. And that's something that Wiki Source aspires to provide. I'm going to show you Wiki Source in a minute, but I want to talk about, when I was preparing the slides, I asked myself, all right, I'm somebody, let's say I'm the Library of Congress, or let's say I'm somebody who's working with their data. I have dumped all of these pictures of old documents out into the world. But what I want, of course, isn't the picture. I want the text. I want what the document says, so I can index it, so I can search it, and so forth. Well, I'm a busy librarian. I've got lots of other things to do. I may not have time to convert the picture to text myself. Is there any way I can get someone to help me with that? And the answer, it turns out, is yes. There are at least 2 different ways to do that. I have links to the sites here. I guess, for reasons of time, I won't actually go through and demo them, but you can certainly look these up in the slides or look them up on Google. But there are 2 ways that I'm aware of, and I'd love to hear others, online of putting a picture out there into the world and getting text back. Getting text back in return. The first is this thing called distributed proofreaders, affiliated with Project Gutenberg. The Project Gutenberg people have digitized now literally hundreds of thousands, I think, of books and put them online. Distributed proofreaders has been around for a long time, and it has a really quite large group of pretty dedicated users, people who sign on every day, to do what? To look at a picture of a book and compare the raw OCR, optical character recognition text, with what they see on the picture and make any corrections, right? It's really rather remarkable. There's a little bit of a generational divide when I talk about projects like this. When I delivered this talk to my faculty, I had some members, predominantly, I will say, the older members of the faculty, present company excluded, just stare at me blankly and raise their hands and start asking questions. Why would anyone do this? Right? What on earth do they get out of it? And I guess the short answer is I don't really know. I mean, I guess you can go read Eric Raymond's book, The Cathedral and the Bazaar. He's got some theories on what people get out of this. But the fact is people do this. The fact is that people do, in very large numbers, sign on to sites like distributed proofreaders and proofread texts. Right? Pictures go in, text comes out. It's a wonderful system for avoiding doing work of that sort yourself. The problem with distributed proofreaders, if this can be called a problem, I guess you could also call it quality control, is that they are really pretty strict on how you can participate. You have to prove yourself to distributed proofreaders. You can't sign up tomorrow and start doing, advanced editing of texts. They want to see you work your way up. It's almost like your own little World of Warcraft guild. You've got to work your way up through the levels of distributed proofreaders to show that you can be trusted, that you can be handled, that you can handle really, really detailed proofreading tasks. As a result, it's hard for new users to jump in. New users can jump in, but you're very likely to be proofreading some 1 or 2 pages out of a work of juvenile fiction or something like that. Right? New users cannot get on distributed proofreaders and start uploading their own texts. They can't say, hey, I've got this great idea for a project. I know I just joined today, but let's distribute and proofread this thing. Right? Can't do that on distributed proofreaders. You really do have to kind of work your way through the levels, through the system, and then eventually you get to the point where you can contribute texts. Distributed proofreaders also, not by any sort of design, I'm sure, but just has very little stuff on it that is of particular interest to lawyers, right? They've got rich libraries in all sorts of domains: fiction, novels, poetry, architectural works. They've got lots of really, really quite good stuff. But if you look through it by keyword and start hunting around for law or legal or anything like that, you're going to come up with a pretty small number of hits. Right? It just has not been a focus for them. All right? Do I have any contributors to distributed proofreaders? I guess anybody want to offer a rebuttal to anything that I've said so far? They are a great bunch. I've done some pages on them myself. Perhaps in time I will, level up to the point where I can start adding texts of my own. But at the rate I've been going, that's going to take a few years, and I've got to publish or perish. So I'm not sure I'm going to be leveling up that quickly. Wiki Source is something a little bit different. It's a wiki. It's like Wikipedia. The great strength and, in some views, the great weakness of Wikipedia is that anybody can do pretty much anything. If you sign on to Wiki Source today, you can add a new work. You can start your own brand new scanning proofreading project. You could be doing it right now as I'm talking to you, frankly. Right? Any user can add or edit any work. It's a wiki. That's the design. Right? I personally find the Wiki Source user interface to be easier. I'll show you in a second. If you are proofing a text, the page and the text appear side by side. If you see something that looks like it's bold on the printed page and it needs to be bold-faced, you just highlight it and click the bold button. Or you can learn Wikimedia's markup, which is not all that difficult. But I think the interface is just a little bit more intuitive. It looks a little bit more like a word processor. Right? Nice thing about Wikisource is that there are a fair number of people on it, myself included, who are kind of interested in legal stuff. They've already got lots of Supreme Court opinions. They've got a couple of complete volumes of the U.S. Code, all the intellectual property stuff. Why? Because that's what us computer and internet geeks care about. Right? So all the copyrights, the entire title of the Copyright Act, the entire patent title of the U.S. Code is on Wikisource. Regulations, people have gone through and just kind of added anything that's necessary to be linked to any of the other texts they've added. There's some guy who used to be a lawyer for the Federal Communications Commission. He's putting all these old FCC rulings up online. So the community is smaller. It's far smaller than distributed proofreaders. It is far, far smaller than Wikipedia. But you do have quite a few people on there who are interested in legal texts in particular. And have added some pretty interesting content. So, with that in mind, I launched last fall a project to produce a digital version of House Report number 94-1476. Now, I know what you are all saying. Of course, if you were going to digitize anything, it's got to be House Report 94-1476, right? Why would you think, even for a moment, about choosing anything else, right? I'm sure that's all that's what you're all saying. Well, on the off chance that 94-1476 is merely a random string of numerals to some of you, I will say that if you teach in the area of copyright law, as I do, you will immediately recognize the significance of that number. That is the House report that was issued to accompany the Copyright Act of 1976, which is the copyright statute that we have all been living under now for the last 32 years. It's probably the single most cited legislative reference in all of copyright apart from the statute itself. Why is that? It's because the statute is bad. It's a poorly written statute. Nobody knows what it really means. To figure out what it really means, you have to look at the legislative history, the legislative report. All right? So far as I was able to determine, this thing has never been freely available online. From the time of its publication in 1976 until last week. Now it is. Right? But that was a kind of a long run when you couldn't actually find the whole text of this thing. Some people had posted snippets, people had posted excerpts. There are these things, there's a part of the House report where they reproduce these educational fair use guidelines, lots and lots of libraries like that. They posted that part of the report. But the whole thing just was not out there. It wasn't available to be found. So I did the kind of a distributed proofreading kind of trick with it, all right? I scanned the pages. We have a nice spiffy new copier in our faculty lounge that produces 600 DPI TIFFs or PDFs of a scanned page. I put them online on Wikimedia Commons, which is another one of the sister sites of Wikipedia. And I created this index page on Wiki Source. I said, hey, I got this document. Who wants to help me proof it? So here is the page that resulted. What you are looking at here is, this is the bird's eye view, the overview. This is what we call the index page for this document, all right? The important part of this, there's sort of a little thumbnail picture of the document. That's fine. You can make that be whatever you want. It's optional. And then the important part is the page is this. This is a grid. Each of these numbers refers to a specific page, one of the specific scans of the document. This is a long document. It's 370 pages long, right? Every one of those pages gets a box, right? The boxes are color-coded. The colors go red, yellow, green, like the stoplight. They have the meanings that you, I think, would find intuitively natural. Red, there's a problem. The text is raw. The text is new. The text hasn't actually been looked at by a human yet. It's raw OCR output, and who knows whether it actually bears any resemblance to the page that's, to the text that's really in the original source image, right? Yellow, it's been looked at by somebody thinks it's correct, and green, at least 2 people have agreed that the text correctly represents the original source page. This document now is mostly green. There's still some yellow pages in the middle. These are really kind of fiendishly complicated 3-column tables that just take a long time to proofread. But most of the document has gone green by this point, all right? All these page numbers are hyperlinks. If I want to see what does page 5 look like, I click, and in the fullness of time, I guess I have to, I'm surprised that the image, usually the image pops up kind of higher up on the page. But here's what you get when you open up any one of those 370 page links. You get a picture of the scan. The picture is, well, not in this browser because it looks like it doesn't have the right plugin installed, but if you click on the image, it zooms in. It fills up more of the page to make proofing easier. And on the other side, you've got the text. You've got what somebody thinks the document reads, right? As that process iterates, let me pick out, I guess I can just use this one. As that process iterates, these are all the edits that have ever been made to this page of the text. When I put it online last September, it looked like this, right? That's crap, right? It doesn't even begin to approximate. But that's okay, because that's OCR, right? OCR technology is imperfect. It produces gibberish from page images, right? Sometimes the gibberish approaches the appearance of English words, and sometimes it gets really pretty close. But nobody thinks that the raw version is kind of the be-all, end-all of the story. All right? As on any wiki site, you can click on the newer revision, and now it starts looking a little bit more like what the source document looks like, and so forth. Eventually, you get up to the current version. Right? Here's the cool part. The cool part is this. At the end of the day, once you've done that process 370 times, or however long it takes, once all of the various anonymous users of the site have logged in and contributed their little pieces to it, you can string the thing together. And that's what's here, right? This is a page, it did load pretty quickly. This page is over a megabyte in size because of it's a reproduction of a 370-page original document. It's an enormous page. It reproduces those weird 3-column layouts when you get down to that part of it. The content of this page is dynamically generated every time you load it. Right? It's dynamically generated by the site going out to every one of those 370 page scans that have been proofread and stringing them together into this thing. Okay? So if somebody comes along and, heaven forbid, finds a typo that has been missed up until this point in one of those 370 pages scans, they correct it on the scan for that page, and the correction automatically shows up anytime somebody views the completed document like this. Right? It took 32 years from the time this document was published to make it freely available online, but now it is. And I didn't have to do all of it, which is perhaps the best part of all, the best part of turning to the community to do proofreading like this, right? It did take 8 months from start to finish, and the Wiki Source being the small site that it is, there would be days go by, weeks would go by when somebody would maybe look at one page, somebody would do a couple, that kind of thing. Not just an enormous volume, enormous outpouring of support from the user community, but it's a small site. And in part, what I wanted to do with this is just kind of a proof of concept. Now that we know that this approach works, that you can actually use sort of a distributed approach to get legal sources like this online, I'm hoping that there will be more projects like this in the future. A couple have sprung up on Wiki Source with other types of documents that were initiated by other people just since I started this one. So I know that there's some level of interest in doing things like this. Right. But that's really it. That's all I had to say. I had one more slide in the slideshow. You can download it if you want. It's just sort of a bibliography of things to read if you want to know more about crowdsourcing in general, right? And the project to digitize texts in particular. But I'd be happy to take questions either about this project or about the Wiki Source thing. Yeah.
Is there some process of control for avoiding the submission or the rescanning of duplicates? In other words, who keeps track of, who's going to prevent the next person from scanning in the same
Scanning the exact same thing. Right. If somebody uploads the exact same text, I think it would show up in a couple of different ways. First, it would show up in the sort of page history in Wiki Source. There would be a notation that says somebody just added the Copyright Act of 1976, and somebody else would send them a note saying, "What are you doing? We already got that." There is on Wiki Source in a few different places a comprehensive index of all of the scanned works that are available to be digitized. I'll show you one of those places now. But one thing that people might do is just check the listing of things that are already up there and say, is this there or is this not there? Right? So there's that way. Sure. Go ahead.
Curious about developments in optics. I've recently heard about the project, I think it's Smithsonian or Library of Congress, where any phonograph record can be read visually. And it's grooved.
I've seen that too, like a really detailed scan or something like that. You actually see the little pits in there, right?
If there are ways in which optics can be used to be able to scan the contents of a book as it sits on a table without being opened.
Without being opened, that would be a new one. I don't know. Anybody? We've far past the frontiers of my ignorance with that question. Anybody have any input? I do know. Yeah, I do know that the Library of Congress has had to develop some really cautious procedures for handling some of the old manuscripts that they've been digitizing, because a lot of the stuff that they're working with is stuff that is so old that it really will fall apart if you handle it excessively. And they have developed sort of hands-off scanning techniques, although I do think they all require the document to actually be placed at least below a camera or something like that. So. I don't think anybody's done it yet where it can all be done without cracking the book open.
Could you go back to the previous slide?
Yes, of course. You mean the prior page, the index page of this? Oh, yes, of course, sorry. These slides are available for download on the conference wiki site too, by the way, and though the hyperlinks, at least as of a few days ago, all worked. So you can follow those along the way too. Yeah.
Have you had any reaction from within the IP law community to post? I mean, it seems like you've done a good thing here.
This just happened. This is brand new. I did send an email to Bill Patry, who is the author of the treatise Patry on Copyright, big name in the IP field. He wrote me back and said, thanks, this will be a fantastic resource to have. He added an exclamation point, so I think he's actually serious about that. But I think at this point it is sort of too new to know whether this really... I think this is a great thing to have because I, like everybody who writes in my area, I cite this damn thing all the time, right? Now I can cut and paste. That's all I wanted to be able to do. I just wanted to be able to cut and paste. Is that so much to ask? But now I can, right? And I can without violating the contractual restrictions on use that are imposed when you sign on to a site like Lexis or Westlaw, like that. It's all free. It's all open. Okay. That's all I had. I know of no reason to keep you if you'd rather be elsewhere.
There's ways to scan books that are very fiber, but it doesn't look like they have a way to plug it. Yeah, they've got X-rays and ultra bright whites. So like, you know, the Dead Sea Scrolls, for example.
Oh, yeah. Some way to, you could calculate the depth of, you know, looking down on it, there was a smell of text, but it was all there, and there was some way to and put it all together. I mean, that's a tremendous boom for it, because you look at it from various pieces. Wow, think of it.
But it's just that so many books
Which means the best case scenario, you have to go really like that slowly. The worst case scenario, you've got no business doing it all. Yeah, I mean, when you get it was almost like this week outside.
Oh, yeah, I got
No, I was just looking. Yeah, I was Wikipedia too. Yeah, sure. No, I just the other day, I was just saying, I saw the program last week. I keep thinking, I put it on the tab where
I'm always and that's partly just why I'm here, but that's never.
oh, yeah, I mean, they're listening. You can crowd.
I made it. Because I heard a couple of people say the same.
It's still not like that.
No.
That was really cool.
But the initial to get all the pages done would take because they're
Yeah, but it's probably
It's worth your time.
I don't want to hear any wise.
although partly that's just because I think it's
Oh, you're touching the wall?
Maybe so.
Oh.
Why you would interpret it.
no, they're not. Well, in some cases, they essentially have the part of the document that I didn't show you consists of this lengthy table which is laid out in landscape format.
Actually, there's
Text and I tried OCR in that. But usually, like a proof
That was.
errors. I don't know, but it was just like some kind of
I don't know, maybe it's supposed to make you feel like you're running one. I was just walking down today, but
big text says, and then the sign is.
it was actually in the food network. Which sounds like I think that's tiny. It'll be enough to make you jump off the seat. Not yet. I'm ready to go to this, I guess.
Yeah.
When Omer's on the short thing, he goes,
Tell
oh, here.
more people about stuff like this, we can build a bigger community.
Yeah, where's Richard? What I was saying, they should all be carrying law firm sponsors.
That was me. Hey, it's a great.
Your ad here.
Looking for money streams, you know? Sharks. No, the sharks themselves.
The sharks themselves.
You know, the Williamson Conley sharks.
Keep me alive. A little more hours, keep me alive.
Always good.
Yeah, you know why? Because, you know, where did you get the cake? Yeah. They have a little document in here somewhere.
As with so many things.
And that's definitely.
Network.
Well, I've gone through those, got to what, cat one?
It's 2 inches.
So you're gonna move?
UMB Gas Wireless only towards 80 and 440. Now, if you're using Entourage, Entourage does this on airport because it's doing it. But that's actually using IMAP. It's not the standard IMAP.
For me, I'm not that interested in that.
Oh, right.
Yeah, you need to. Really?
By the way, I emailed
One more thing you haven't
along
told Tiger
Mr.
Woods.
you and Matt, just asking some questions. What might be a good idea and what might not be a good idea. I'm starting to think that having all of those devices and DMZ. Well, I know that we were going to issue an ISO.
That's the word.
There's a couple.
I gotta move it up a
Private
little
IP
bit.
ranges.
So we're back to where we were before.
Well, no, not necessarily.
I mean, this is, they're just gonna give us a set of IPs that we.
He only has to do one to get free.
Well, probably not.
Free.
There will be a free. Which you don't have it's still going to be
It's got the little tick flags in it.
No, it's going to change.
I mean,
$10
this is a
something.
valuable lawyer.
130.39.
You see that guy's post on whichever
But,
blog that was
what would be
about
different is
legal
they're
practice
totally
coming to a
inaccessible.
stop if there were no more 3 unpaid flags. Yeah, Tim posted it today.
Tim Wilkes?
Tim Stanley. He did Bob Ambrosius thing with a pointer to that Grimmel.
Brian, have you seen Stuart Sierra?
There was a rather remarkable photograph of Carl Malone presenting him with a copy of the reporter of decision, a copy of the seal of approval. Carl has no frickin' shame. Malvin.
Young.
Alright, boys, I'm gonna see you guys later.
Later.
I'm sure we'll do something interesting.
Yeah.
Doubt it. Get out of here?
No.
I don't remember what the was. 20 for what?
I was wrong about Sierra.
You know, you're right.
The one wire and the next technology.
And that if all those people knew that there was.
It's in this room.
I want to see what she does.
It's in this room.
Yeah, and if it doesn't,
We wouldn't
you
have to
just
move.
beat somebody up and then talk about life. That one.
In my whole life.
If you were gonna do that,
It's on the back again.
if they were gonna all of it,
Yeah.
few minutes ago, I'd say.
Exactly.
So it's
Since Emilio Gaspari, I've been so and so. Never been to Salerno? No. Then how do you?
Okay, so usually the freezer is at the hardwood floor.
Yeah, it's a great. There's the aquarium. Wire and information. You want to take water?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right. That's what I think.
I don't know if there's ice cream or not.
We could send an emissary.
Sarah, please investigate the ice cream issue and report. We'll watch your laptop.
Put it on your blog. Make sure you Twitter.
Right, exactly, exactly.
Passing rule 108. 107. Getting closer. I just don't get the whole freaking point. I really don't. I really don't.
I thought we were talking about that.
Stop the entire shoe.
But it just seems
Now
like a
experiencing mild gas pain.
steroidal version of why post to MySpace. Yeah. You know, it's like if I don't write about it, it didn't happen. Which in my day was like a good thing. Like,
Yeah.
don't write about it because you don't want people to know.
No,
what happened,
exactly.
right? I have no records. My kids can't prove the things that I say.
And if you can remember the next morning.
Sir, that's how I keep getting away with this assertion that I never dated any actresses, you
And
know?
what if you actually wrote that? And tonight. We'd be in the wire. Not the
Baby,
Goes to water taxi would.
oh, baby, oh, baby.
Things to do with whipped cream. By Tom Bruce.
After that insult. Technology in-depth faculty, and I'm sitting there.
Oh, man. Twitter. It's like definitely pressure. For people our age.
That is not a place for everyone. Fascinating how the world has changed.
So you used to say about everything more boring and all this stuff on television. Oh, well, I like it actually.
Yeah, well, this kid should slow it down a little
So it must
bit.
be.
How are you on fishing shows?
I'm not there yet. Yeah, this here.
Is a bonefish.
They're also hunting shows.
Those are these,
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And now we're gonna blow. What was that? Clean.
So Frank is getting Fire TV. There's suddenly now 1,000 channels.
Sure.
Filled with something.
I was sitting in a barber shop one day, and I heard this, I can't see the television, I'm hearing this thing that sounds like a travel log for a prison, and I thought, well, okay, you know, it's like it's a special feature, they're talking about federal penitentiary, well, when that finishes, it's a bad, we started with a travel log, and another one. And there is, I think, actually something out there called the Corrections Channel.
Dear. I didn't know you could pick them. I like this little multi-wall rule, perhaps.
With low humidity.
The Simpson camaraderie.
Crips, slugs, alienation.
We want diversity.
We got your Crips, we got your Glens, we got your area brothers.
You said to find somebody you'll fit in.
And a deep commitment to social justice.
Sharing reform-oriented community.
You must be looking forward
No
to it.
disrespect. I was just reading it. It's family times.
Many of our community members have been previously involved with Wall Street.
I got the Costello family. The Gambino family.
Many of our members have been